at any other time of the year. So, but that's Maryland. How about Delaware? Out of Lewis, maybe?
Indian River.
Okay. Yeah, there was a boat, the Judy B. There you go. I'm just around, and then we move into Jersey. And that is the fine line of where we stop calling them flounder from the south and they become fluke, and they're the same darn fish. But I'm sure, you know, here we are in Jersey, so I bet a lot of you guys fish that, those waters. And then we get into New York. I need to spend more time on Long Island. For me, the issue is getting there and then staying there. If I want to fish a few days, it gets pretty costly. So I know some guys actually end up sleeping in their vehicles in the parking lot rather than $500 for a hotel. And so then we eventually end up, I don't know, Connecticut. I've never fished Connecticut. So I have a friend here that is inviting me to go this year, so I want to try it. But how about Rhode Island? That is the mecca for me now. Fish out of Narragansett, Point Judith, and you'll see a lot of what I present today. I learned from fishing those waters. And then obviously, as soon as I say Massachusetts, and you got Yarmouth and the Nantucket Shoals, and has anybody fished it? Yeah, great. All right, well, we have everybody here, so I got kind of the background on people. Let me say what I'm presenting has application in a lot of places. It's not just one spot only. So I find these fish to be somewhat universal in the way they react and respond. So my name is Geoff Cerelli. I've fished 30 plus years, more than that. I'm more than double that in age, and I've been fishing since I was a youngin', but in terms of the Atlantic coast. And there were times I actually moved away and moved to Texas and Wyoming, and I couldn't quite fish here so readily. I will say there's tricks I learned out there that I applied here, and they seem to work. There's strategies that I see the way fish respond, and it's almost a universal, at least if they're predatory. And you can see all those states I just referenced, who's fished where. I fished every one of them. And I bait drifted back in the early days when we fished Wachapreek and Chincoteague with a squid and a minnow. Gotten into jigging, and I'll say, you just have to believe me. I was jigging for a heck of a lot longer than Mr. Skinner was. You know, he's dynamite with it. But we were doing it back in the early 90s, and we even pioneered it with a tiller steer remote or a tiller steer bow mount trolling motor. And the objective in the back bays was to stay vertical on the outgoing tide, especially early in the year. And right on those channel edges with that warm water flushing over, if you fight the wind with the bow mount, the gauge is your line. If you're running over your line, you're giving it too much thrust. I'm going right into the wind now. And the channel's going this way, the water's moving this way. If I did nothing, the wind's pushing me across and I lost the channel and I don't have much for fish. But if I fight it, then I can stay there. If I fight it too hard, I come out of the channel and I'm running over my line. So the beauty is when I'm vertical jigging, down the channel with the wind in my face is just to give it enough speed so the line stays vertical. I already said what happens if I run over it. If I don't give it enough thrust, I'm losing it and it's going that way. So the objective is to stay vertical. And in so doing, I'm using the lightest jig possible as well. I'm moving the way the water is. So keep that in mind. And lastly, what I've really picked up on in recent years is drifting spoons and the beauty of them. My biggest fluke thus far is an 11-pounder. I've caught several under 10, but close to 10, and a number of those have come on the spoons, but also on jigs and whatnot. So here's Mr. Fluke, and here on the coast, whatever, on the Atlantic side, you can get them even into the Gulf of Mexico, from Texas all the way up to Maine. There's different subspecies, and as I said earlier, there's fish now being caught in Virginia at between Chincoteague and Wachapreek, close to Wachapreek.
They caught the first ones 2 days ago.
There you go.
I live in Chincoteague. They caught the first ones 2 days ago.
Okay. They used to call Wachapreek, and I think it was just the town council decided they'd put up their billboard and titled themselves the flounder capital of the world. It kind of fell off that little precipice in recent years, but as a much younger man, I remember driving down there in the spring of the year, and there was no place to park. All the trailers and pickup trucks. It's kind of sad to go there now and see three. What's that? No, this was. Oh, okay. Now we're speaking winter flounder. down in Virginia, what we call fluke up here, they call flounder, and then, so that their town council put a billboard sign that said flounder capital of the world. I think they might have taken that sign down.
Going to the New York Aquarium, fluke is not called fluke, it's only called summer flounder.
Summer flounder. That is the universal true name for the summer flounder, that's correct. So it seems like some of those southern waters, the larger size fish and even the higher numbers have kind of receded, but pretty good stronghold starting in Jersey up through New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. So, question is, where do these fluke hang out, and especially the big guys? And I coined this term here. These fluke tend to position themselves where there's an abrupt change in the bottom, some kind of change. And when that happens and these currents, tidal currents are moving, that creates this troubling turbulence for bait fish. They struggle, and the fluke doesn't. He's just kind of laying there waiting, and when he sees one hapless bait fish or squid or shrimp or whatever, he's going to make a meal of it. So that's a focus point for him, if you can find where that's happening. That occurs at channel edges, on shoals, especially on the down current side of a shoal, where that rolling water going over the top creates that turbulence I'm referencing. You get out on the flats though, and we have this at Wachapreague and Chincoteague. It's high tide, and these waters, which are at low tide around a foot or so, maybe 5 foot high now, but it's a big flat. And so there's not a focus point, but they're out there feeding randomly. And so you just pretty much, we would power troll for them at times, or you could wind drift, but don't count on where you got one, there's a bunch. You could be, and you could try and drift it again, but they tend to be more scattered. And so your luck that way begins to become more scattered as well. So wherever the primary bait fish that they're feeding on is located is where they're going to be, and make a meal of them. That could be sand eels, peanut bunker squid or mackerel, anything like that. And kind of these areas have their local favorites. I know I hadn't really thought on mackerel, and then I'd seen a lot of folks reference that up at Nantucket in June of the year is when the mackerel come on. I think they might call them tinkers. And lo and behold, that's a primary forage for those fluke. In general, well, it says here, the critical is timing of the season, when they're going to be where they're at. They don't always hang out. And for instance, at Wachapreague, they would come in March and get on these shallow flats, barrier islands. But by May and June, they're heading back out to the ocean. So where we caught them in April, they're not there anymore. So, and that happens in a lot of locations. So you have to be time mindful. And in general, the general routine is these fluke come in the spring of the year and get themselves spread out where they're going to spend a lot of the time, the summer, spring and summer. But then as fall approaches, it seems like one good storm comes in the fall, and out they go, back out towards the continental shelf. So it's said that they spawn, I don't know if it's on the way out there, at the shelf itself, or in that vicinity, or right before they come back in. But that's where it all happens for them. Somewhere out offshore, not inshore. So these fluke have some teeth, and they mean business. Don't ever put your hand down there trying to get a hook out, or you'll find out they hurt. So, but what that means is they are scavengers. They're not predators. So they're going to be aggressively, seeking fish that are hapless or being blown about by the turbulence and grabbing a hold of them. Once they do, there's no getting away from them there. So, but for that matter, it's very helpful to have a bait, a presentation that's moving, that's darting around. And that's why you see videos like with Skinner, he's twitching it constantly. And that's causing those fish, it's causing them to respond and focus on that. You've probably as well seen his videos, and there's others, where there's an underwater camera of these baits being drifted along. And in this case, he's got the camera on the rig that's dragging the bait. And so he doesn't get you dizzy, he's not jigging it, or the camera would go everywhere. And you see this fluke following the bait a foot behind it for 30 seconds, not doing anything. It's because it needs to twitch. Not that they won't ever bite that, but if you were to jig it, that would be what's it. And that's why when he's jigging next to it, he's catching them. So that's that deal with being a predator. You need to to target him or to get him to get that predatory instinct going and out of instinct hit something that's dancing around. So just to be clear, my notes here, what I'm referencing is fishing from a boat. I know as a youngster, I had fished off a bridge at Ocean City, Maryland, or at Indian River off the jetty there, and we caught some, but what I'm covering here is largely from a boat that's free drifting. I never have anchored to do it. It's always moving because, again, we're trying to intrigue that fluke. Something's getting away. It's darting around. Hit it. Not it's just sitting here forever. Take your time. So the optimal is when we have wind with the tide. So it's moving in the same direction and our baits are moving effectively. If you get wind against the tide, it's just trouble. The current's going to take your bait this way and the boat's going that way, and there's terms I've heard it called, the boat won't even go in a constant direction. It's sliding around, but it's not greatly effective. And you'll hear captains complain all the time when there's wind against the tide, but they cheer when it's wind with the tide. Of course, we set up our trips, charter trips, way in advance. We'd never be able to forecast when we book our trips what the weather's going to be exactly. But there is a beauty in going on the headboat when you can see 2 or 3 days ahead of time what your likely outcome would be. And that's one advantage I put towards going on a headboat. So there's a basic strategy is, use this gear whenever I'm jigging over here. I want it light enough that it stays near vertical. But if the lighter it is, the more it responds when I tap it around. If it's so heavy, I can hardly move it. And so that makes it more of a struggle. But if it's too light and we're drifting kind of fast, all of a sudden it's going too far behind me, and it seems to respond here okay, being dragged on this angle, but when we're actually fishing, it loses a lot of the presentation if I'm on a real steep. That's called scoping out, when the sinker goes way back on that angle. And preferably we keep it near vertical. That was what I referenced when I said we used to drift behind the islands there at Watchapre and control with the motor. We were seeking to have vertical here. And I never really worked a rig like this that way. I always had a simple lead head, and we were in perhaps 25 foot of water with a ½ ounce to 3/4 ounce jig, just staying vertical, bouncing it around. And believe it or not, I told you I was doing this a little bit before Mr. Skinner. Gulp didn't even exist then. We were, in our heyday, we were using Mr. Twister tails, plastic baits, and we were able to intrigue those fluke just by seeing it. There was no smell, but they would whack pretty good. So it's that action that triggers that predatory instinct that I'm talking about. So, and there, that last line there, we want to keep the line as near vertical as possible. The one out is when I'm running a fluke spoon. I don't need to do that, and that's because you'll see when I get to that point. We're moving pretty fast. It's virtually impossible, but thankfully the spoons don't require it to be vertical or near vertical. So there's different things I can run. I can run lead heads, little teasers. They're not weightless, but there are some that are weightless. That one I had on there is virtually weightless. But you can have them down. These could be upwards of, 1, 2, up to 6 ounces, they say is, I think the most I've ever gone is 4 or 5 ounces. I don't know if I've done much with 6 ounces, but that's a common reference I hear is 6 ounce. These teasers can be 1/4 ounce, maybe down to 1/8 or up to 3/8. I don't know if I've seen them go with a half. It's all in how you can, as you dance it around, that response. You have the sinker below it. These are not intended to take your rig down. They just ride along with whatever you do. So a weightless one zips around a little more than one that has weight. What do they want? You got to figure it out that day and adjust. If you see somebody using a weightless one and you have a 3/8 ouncer and they're catching and you're not, put a weightless one on and dance it. And we'll get to it. These are the spoons. Here, this is a bigger one that I'll run independent, but there's some, we have 3-inch spoons that aren't really meant for dragging as this one is. This one is meant for a high-low rig. It's a 3-incher, and as you dance it around, it has a certain action. When we do those kind of things, if you ever run a 3-inch spoon on a high-low, you always want it up high. What we're doing is counting on the fact that that fluke can see something further away if it's up higher. And he'll come in, and if he wants to hit that spoon, he will. Other than that, he can hit the low one, which is not a spoon, but it's still something they might want to bite on. We can have gulp on each of those hooks. I bet everybody here has heard of a high-low rig or a chicken rig, popcorn. That's the tour right there. And you can put a hook with a teaser in front, however you choose. Sometimes the fluke can be particular in color and profile. Other times, if it's down there and bobbing around, they're going to hit it. The bite is almost, can tell you which mood they're in. If they're hitting it vigorously, they probably would hit about anything. If they're more tentative and no one else is getting them, well, you have kind of the magic ticket that day and they're not even that aggressive, but you found something they are liking. You can even go down, and I'll cover this, where I've seen this single hook rig work outstandingly. So the fact is, if I have a single down here, that's less drag than having two. So lo and behold, I'm actually less prone to scoping out when I have a single hook behind me than two. That's creating more drag. So keep that in mind if you're struggling. Ways to fight scope is lighter braid line. And I'll cover some thoughts on that. So M3 offers these rigs already. I haven't seen lately the ones with the two 8-inch loops for if you run two spoons, but and that's the one that's showing here. So if we're going to run a 3-inch spoon, we need an 8-inch loop because we're sliding all this stuff up there. Then you're putting the spoon, it runs in the top hole across the arch of the spoon and back to the bottom one. Well, you still need loop length to fit your hook on there, so that's why it needs to be 8 inches. If we're running just teasers and stuff, tend to go with a 4-inch loop off of there. And these distances, you can vary them, depends on how aggressive the fluke are. And it, when I say I don't want any scope is inevitable, it's how far back, but the more it scopes out, the closer your baits are to the bottom. If the fluke don't want to come up high, great, but they can't see it from as far away either. So again, I always look to the top one as being the calling card. If they're aggressive and want it, they can hit it. If they're not so, they can hit the lower one. But they were called in by the upper one. Pay attention to that too as you get bites, which one you seem to be catching them on. And then there's this spoon rig. We have the harnesses here that, at the booth where you can put on any spoon that you like. We have so many different colors, metallic ones, and then pink, and then this one imitates sea robin. I've caught them on all different colors, so I'll cover a little bit about that. And we tend to go a little bit heavier because we're not staying down. We're moving so fast, and I'll cover the drift speed when I start going to a spoon, but it's fast. And so the tendency is for it to want to scope out, so I need a little bit heavier line, and I'm probably going to be using 20 to 40 pounds, just say a good middle of the road is 30-pound braid as my main line to run a spoon. And I should go back. You can see it's trailing behind. So the sinker's going to be clipped here, and as we drift through the water pretty fast, they sell different length rigs, and I've always maintained if you think you see somebody else running with a short one, the beauty is this is a monofilament leader. You can simply cut it off and retie it on to shorter length and have a geometry that they seem to prefer that day if need be. So the popular bait is gulp to put on any of these, the bucktails, the spoons, the high-low, whatever it be. So that's great. I've done it as well in concert with, or sometimes alone. I'm using the meat strips like fluke belly or bluefish, sea robin, stuff like that. And the objective is to create a strip, not quite like a piece of bacon. That's a little wider than I like, maybe a 1/2 to 3/4 inch wide, coming to a point, maybe 6 inches long. And we're always hooking the fat end, and we're only hooking it once. We never gob the bait up. It's not like we're going for bluegills or catfish with a big blob on there. The objective is to create this kind of interesting looking profile that's drifting through the water. Even though it's just a piece of strip, it looks like it could be alive because it's got that flutter, which happens from being dragged behind singly hooked, not gobbed up. If you think that bigger fish bigger bait equates to bigger fish, it could be true. No, I'm not going to say all the time, but what I will say is if you're going to run a longer bait, you need really good drift speed. Long baits are more troubling at slow speed, so make sure and I'll show a video here, even though I don't have bait on it, but what I'm looking for with drift speed to make sure I'm getting a good bait presentation. Keep in mind, as I said, I could run gulp, and I've done gulp and put a meat strip on there. Whatever you put on that hook, and the gulp tends to run up the shank of the hook, leaves the bend pretty well exposed, but not perfectly. Now I'm adding a bait strip hooked once. What we don't want to ever overdo, if this is the long shank and here's my hook, I don't want to come over halfway around the bend or lower. What we're doing is crowding out the hooking potential of this hook. I want to leave the back end of that able to hold that fish and not forcing him forward and off the hook. So that means bigger hooks. If you're going to use a lot of bait on there, or big baits, big gulps like 6 and 7 inchers, and a bait strip, I'm going to think 7.0 minimum, probably an 8.0. We fish some in Maryland and in Delaware. They tend to be a little bit smaller fish, and we're using maybe a 4-inch gulp, maybe just a shiner on there. Well, I can get by with a 4.0 hook on that. So it depends on where you're fishing, what bait you're using, and the size of the fish in general. I like the bait holder hooks, the long shank with those little barbs on the back. That helps keep the gulp in place. It's not needed for the bait strips because the bait strips don't ride up there. They hang back at the bend of the hook. And that reminds me then, so if you have a bait strip and I'm hooking it once, I don't want to hook it 3 inches up from the end. I want to hook it maybe a ½ inch up from the fat end that's tapering back, so it doesn't have really anything left to bend back as we drift through the water over the hook. So here at a slow speed, I'm going to go from slow to fast. I would probably use a spinning outfit because what I'm going to end up having to do is cast. The boat's not moving. We need movement to get these fluke triggered. So if the boat's not going to do it, I'm going to have to do it, and I'm going to pitch out uniformly on like a head boat. You never dare cast over. You're going to go underhand, but the objective then is to pitch out up current. If we're drifting this way, I don't want to throw that way because even though we're not moving fast, I'm already losing to it. But if I throw out, if we're going this way, I can throw out that way and then bring it in like this, jigging it as I bring it in. So that's the objective there. We can use light bucktails then because we're not fighting current. Maybe a 2-ouncer, depending on your depth. And a lot of this I'm referencing to the ocean and not back bay. But I'll admit I haven't put a lot of focus on back bay barrier fishing, barrier island fishing of late. But some of these methods here clearly could be of use and same principles of triggering those fish through movement of the bait. So again, we'll cast up current, let it hit the bottom, and then we're hopping it back. You're going to twitch it around, but give it some rest too to give those fish, they're on it, it's erratic. It's not constantly just moving around. Gives them a chance to hit it. That sinker, as it pounds the bottom, is kind of a calling card to them. They can hear it, they can feel it, that vibration, that water transmits that energy amazingly. And then they can see it as well, those little puff clouds of silt that you're creating. All that goes into your favor in attracting these fish. Lots of times as you're doing that, you know, it won't always be that you jig and he hits right away. You're going to go, and if I say you hesitate, you slow down, you stop for a second, you go to lift and it's not moving. You're like, uh-oh, I'm snagged. I'm going to guess 9 times out of 10 you're not snagged. That's a fluke. He's on it there. And a lot of times, if you have your rod up on a slight angle, I just bow down to him until we catch up. When it's fully down here, now I can set the hook, and I have room to do it. If I set the hook too high, I've lost. Now, how do I get that line back unless I can reel crazy fast without putting slack in the line? And that's something we don't want to do. So that pounding of the bottom is again one of those attractors. As the drift speed picks up now between a half and 1 knot, we can still go with spinning or casting. It becomes less effective casting out because the boat's moving a little too fast for you to gain much by working it back. You can still use it to some extent, but we'll pitch it out or jig. What we're going to allow it to happen is some scoping until we get to, I don't know, a 30 degree from, this is vertical, we can go 30 degree, or that would be 60, I'm sorry, it's 30 on the opposite end, but that's where I feel comfortable is maximum scope that I like. And we can achieve that for good ways depending on how fast we're going and the sinker size I have there. The heavier sinker fights the scope right there. So, but we are twitching it. And I believe that's a lot of what you see John Skinner doing is this speed, the half to 1 knot. And he's very effective that way. You can drop it straight down. You don't generally see Skinner casting out. He's just dropping it down and working it along like that. And again, as we've gone for a minute and a half, I've lost little by little each time I dig. Well, now it's just too far. Let me start again. Now I start again. I'm vertical. And I keep working, and I've gone another minute or two. Okay. So lots of times in that minute or two, that's enough to get that fish. So that's why you do it. Now we're picking up lots more speed, and we're pretty much abandoning the spinning rod. I tend to, and I'm going to a casting outfit, conventional, with 15 to 20 pound braid, and the same type thing, a high-low rig probably, and bouncing that around. And pretty much then all hope is lost for trying to cast out and gain any benefit from that. So I'm going to drop it down with a heavier sinker, heavier weight, and work it, as I said, until I lose out the scope, and then bring it back in and start over, hopefully having caught a fish before I scope. And now we come into where, this is kind of my favorite. It used to be, I hated when we were going too fast because I knew I didn't stand a great chance using the jigs and high-low rigs and stuff when we started going really fast. It's because we were scoping out. And then I started hearing about these fluke spoons, and I wondered about them, and then I contacted M3 and I bought some and started trying them. And well, the first day I tried it up on Nantucket Shoals I mentioned my biggest was 11 pounds. Believe it or not, that came in like my first 15, 20 minutes of running a spoon. I got my biggest one ever. So it clearly has benefit. And you'll see in a video a little bit here why it does it. But basically what it's doing for you, you're going to scope out with anything, including the spoon. But the spoon I can still, by running a heavy enough sinker, and sometimes over 12 ounces, sometimes up to 16 or maybe 20. But it's still making contact with the bottom. And I don't need to jig it, the reason being because we're drifting fast enough that the spoon's wobbling because it's going through the water. And that's the attraction for the fluke. Any other thing I'm running, I can't jig it well enough to get it to move around. It's just being drugged. So that's where the spoon really helps out. And what I'll want to do before I drop it to the, rig it up and drop it to the bottom and say I'm good, I always want to test it right next to the boat with the sinker and bait it up, but drop it down so I can still see it. And I want to see that spoon wobbling up top before I let it down. What I never want to have do, well, it would have happened if I didn't test it and we weren't going fast enough, and then realistically, if I had tested it near there, the spoon wouldn't do anything. It would just kind of fall down there. And guess what it's going to do when it gets to the bottom? Just there, drag. And even if you're moving okay, but not enough to wobble the spoon, you're just going to get hung up and cry that these are not, cheap lures. They run a decent price right there, so you don't want to run them when there's a great risk of losing them to snags. And that's what happens when you're moving just a little too slow. So we'll drop it down under a decent speed after we verified it's wobbling up near the surface. And we're just going to occasionally tap the bottom. All I want to do is, I got to be near the bottom for these flukes. They're bottom fish. So I got to make sure, if my sinker's near the bottom and I have this rig dragging the spoon, then my spoon's near the bottom. And so all I need to do is, we're going so fast, I just need to every once in a while bow the rod down, and you'll feel it thunk the bottom. You feel that slight thunk on the line. And so yeah, I'm still there near the bottom. And then every once in a while you go to lift to let it thunk the bottom and it won't move. You're actually dragging a fluke then when that's what's happening. He's already grabbed onto the bait. So again, all I do then is bow down to him, reeling up, lift again slightly. Do I feel him there? And then if he's still there, I'm going to set the hook and go. So I liken it as well. The beauty of the spoon is with these other methods, and if you've seen John Skinner and other guys who, imitate him, go aggressively jigging, well, that's great, and it's very effective too under the right conditions, but it's hard to maintain the attention of a young kid to do that vigorously for long. But running a spoon, he doesn't have to do that. They just hang on and you just say, hey, check the bottom, check the bottom. Hey, Dad, it won't move. That's because you have a fluke on, reel them in. So that's why they hadn't had to worry about doing this kind of stuff continuously for hours. The spoon will do that for them. And again, we're testing it near to make sure it's good, near the surface. And if it's wobbling, then we'll put it down. I'd say I have success anywhere from 60 to even flat, which would be 30 degrees coming to me. I've had scoping back and still caught effectively with the spoon. And again, we're just wanting to, as we do that, here's the spoon here. I should have been picking these rods up. There's that sinker, and again, when it's running, you know, here's one that I don't even know which one this imitates. They come up with all these different colors, and this is the biggest size we make there at M3. This is called a 6-inch spoon. It's really 5.5 inches long. But they have different color patterns, and this is running like that. Pay no attention that I added the spinner to this. I'm going to try and convince Ryan and Marlon, the owner of M3, to consider that. I want to prove it a little more this season to see. I outcaught everybody, and a couple guys were running spoons last year. And so one day I clearly had the advantage. I want to see it happen a few more times, and then I'll go to Ryan and say, you got to do this. So, well, that was the difference in our rigs. Was maybe I had a different color on too. I think it was the spinner. I'm blowing my own horn. I went to Ryan before and said, hey, you know, spoons are so cool, but they didn't start with fluke. From when I was a kid, what I remember the spoon, the most vivid in my mind was the Daredevil spoon, were used for Northern Pike. And so, I don't know if I have, it was probably in the posting for me when they showed my photo for speakers. Anyway, I said, we need that Daredevil spoon, but Daredevil's already taken. So, but we want a red and white pattern like a Daredevil, but we want to have a woman on it holding a fishing rod. We'll call it a Dare Angel spoon. So, and lo and behold, I ran it last year and kicked butt with it. So it's just fun. I don't think it mattered that day, but I felt great that, hey, Ryan, I told you that would work. So I got some hacks now for catching them. So if we're fishing fluke and we're getting bite with whatever method we're using, and I get the bite and I swing on him, but I miss, don't cry that, oh, I lost him forever. He could still be down there or one near him that's still aggressive and ready to go. So you want to drop your bait right back down. You're kind of hoping you still have bait. I would say if you have gulp, you likely do. Meat strips, sometimes, you know, a lot of times they still hang on. So clearly you want to drop it back down. You're basically out of the game as soon as you reel it up. You're not on that fish anymore. So give yourself that chance by lowering it back down to the bottom and hoping that you still have bait. And oftentimes they will come back and hit it again. We want to vary the colors on whatever presentation we have, jigs, spoons, gulp, until we find one that they like that day or that hour. They can change throughout the day. It depends on drift speed and things like that, and maybe what the forage is doing at that time. Sometimes these fluke relate primarily to a certain forage color. So this one again is sea robin here. We have some, I don't think they want them on. We have some that look like mackerel, and again, I said that's a big primary bait fish there in around the Nantucket shoals. So it depends on what time you're fishing and if the fish really are keyed in on that. Other times, like I said, almost any color is going to work. It's that wobble profile that's drawing their attention, the action, more so than the color. So, but sure enough, lure, bait profile, size, and jigging action, I think are more important than the true color of the bottom or of the rig that you have down there. That's kind of the final ingredient. Now, a lot of guys are intimidated of running these, and I am as well. If I get in what we call a sticky bottom with, around the reef, and there's a lot of debris down there, and we have them at the booth. I meant to grab it, and I simply didn't. We have what they call snagless sinkers, which are a sinker, doesn't quite look like this. It's more of a barrel shape, but it's got a steel rod that sticks out to the bottom. And so what it is, it's kind of like a blind man. So that steel rod, which is thin diameter, is what's actually touching the bottom. And anything that's of size, like a sinker, in which could get wedged in the bottom, is a foot above the bottom, or however long that steel shank is. So that's one of those tricks that can be used. I've heard of other guys going to a slightly longer. I made this rig. I'll show you how I make it here at the end. They just go with one 2 or 3 foot high, and they make a sacrificial piece of line leading to the sinker. So if it gets hung, they lose the sinker, not the spoon.
So on that metal, I have one. I haven't used it because I always thought the line is gonna wrap around that, that's going down.
I only used them a couple times, I didn't have that problem, so, I would encourage you to try it, and certainly if it hangs up, then say, well, that's not working for me, so.
That's why I put it away.
Okay.
What kind of hook is on that spoon?
These are dual hook here, that's what they come with. So the front end one is a little bit smaller. I'd say this back one is a 7.0, maybe an 8.0, and the front one might be a 5.0. When I do that, if I'm showing you this, and this is the back one, the back one is the only one I put gulp on. You never put gulp on this one because this is wire, it's going to get in the way, it can't run true. You want everything to be streamlined profile. So what I'll talk about a certain bait rig that I've used greatly, but I tend to put the gulp on first, that's sticking here, and if I'm adding a bait strip to the back hook, I put it on after the gulp, it goes on top of it. And I've been known, and I'll talk about that one, to put actually a bait strip on both hooks, and I'll explain that here shortly.
So you're recommending twister tail type gulp?
Yes.
Not the swimming shads?
That's correct, but I've seen other guys do okay, just as good, or, but I tend to use the twister tail, that fluttering thing.
I live in Chincoteague and fish there a lot.
Okay.
And nobody uses, I used to use twister tails when we go 35 miles out and fish wrecks. We have success with flounder in the fall with those.
Okay.
But any other time, guys use a bucktail and a swimming shad.
Okay.
4 and 5 inch, and they very successful with it, Jim.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm just, this spoon idea, I would never use that on a wreck area because you're gonna lose it.
Okay. I would encourage you to try it if you have it well marked out, maybe the perimeter, if you can hit the perimeter of it. It is daunting, and like I said, I think those spoons are running close to $15 a piece. So it is something you don't would just, okay, put them all down and let's lose 3 of them real quick. So, anyway, that's that snagless sinker. So what I tend to like on the bright sunny days, they have them in gold and chrome. This is I don't know what they call burnt orange. There's one here called Brello that I know have done very well with that. These are metallic, shiny finishes, and so we kind of take advantage of the sunshine to reflect on those. On the bright sunny day, cloudless, they can do that. On the overcast days is when we go to these painted ones. And I won the pool a few times on a headboat, the one out of Delaware, using paint there like that. So that's just my basic rule of thumb. And 4 to 6 inch, I like the curly tails and gulp. Colors like pink shine, white, salmon red, nuclear chicken. I'm not the new guy to tell you that. I bet you do these kind of things already. If you are running a conventional, some of these smaller reels, a lot of them come with a twin handle, but they're pretty small and close to there, and you kind of lose it because it's too tight and you don't get a lot of power. So I suggest getting either a reel with a power handle or getting a power handle to add and trade out that dual handle on your rod, and it makes it a lot more enjoyable to catch fish that way. All right, what am I doing for time? Gotta step it up here. So when we're reeling in a fluke, we don't pump up and reel down like you see with other fish. As soon as you start going down and you're not going fast enough, you put a belly in line and he's wobbling like that, and if he times it right, there goes the hook. So it's best just to continuously reel like that. If you get a monster on there and you're continuously reeling and he starts going frantic, then just stop reeling, let him do it. Keep that bend in the rod. That rod's gonna maintain tension and everything he does is absorbed by the rod, but you're killing yourself trying to reel through that. Just let him do his thing. He'll give up eventually and then you can continue reeling. So when you're hooked into a quality fluke, you don't want to reel, or any fluke really, but to the surface. As soon as their body hits the very surface of the water, they tend to go nuts. So we just kind of scoot them along a foot or so below the surface toward the mate, whoever in the boat has the net waiting for them, and you just swim them right into there. So if somehow there's a misconnect between me and the guy with the net, and he misses or it doesn't get there, I don't stop. If you stop, he's moving forward and you stop, there goes your slack and he's going to bang around and get away. So what we do then is oh shoot, you missed, let me keep pulling forward, now I'm gonna loop them around, and then I'm gonna, here comes on the next pass, get him this time with the net. So that's how you do it. And if you're getting a lot of dogfish, which we tend to do oftentimes in Rhode Island or out of Nantucket, then it's just, it's a losing battle. You just need to move to where they are better, higher numbers of fluke than dogfish. And so remember that conditions are changing throughout the day, so whatever presentation you're using now, great, but if conditions change, you probably need to change your presentation, your rig. Depends on the speed that you're moving and things like that. So if you're fishing in a group, whether it's friends or on a head boat, but you see somebody out there doing a lot better than everybody else, take a look at what they're doing because they have the magic right then. So try and copy what they're doing and you'll probably be a lot more successful.
Hey, Jeff,
Yes,
are fishing for fluke, is it tide dependent?
certainly. Certainly, but it's hard to predict. It's current dependent, not so much tide. Obviously, if you're fishing Barrier Islands, Back Bay, that's in and out tides. You get out in that ocean, it's less. It's not a 6-hour cycle through. The currents do vary through the day, but it's not like on the clock with high tide and low tide. And
I'm just thinking about like the actual farms and reef or things like that.
right. So. And I mentioned about hooking the baits just once, and then you'll hear guys bragging on this rod, and you got to buy this one because it's the best and only. You need to go to the bait shop, the tackle shop, and pick that rod up. See if it feels good for you to use, and then decide. So these are the most successful presentations that I have seen used for fluke. And Captain Gordy on the KDB, it was a poison tail, but it kind of looked like this rig. It was maybe a quarter ouncer, but he had this short single. And he was outclassed because he had it on a spinning rod. And we had a little bit of a drift going, and we were in like 80 foot of water, and he had like a Bass freshwater Bass Pro rod. And with the 8 ounces he had on there, the rod was already bent over. I'm like, well, good luck with that. And next thing I see him reefing, and he's reeling on, hey! And imagine that, charter captain, and we got a net the 10-pounder for him. And so, just to prove it was not an oddity, about 10 minutes later he caught another 10-pounder. In that same rig. And it was again a single that he was just kind of, as the boat was drifting, he was just popping it. And that seemed to work. That color there, I've gone on to mimic it, was a light fluid color. And seemed to be magical. No one else seemed to have that on the boat. And one guy got desperate and he found surgical gloves that he had, some guys wear them and they were light blue. He started shredding it and took a bread twist tie and put that on his jig and he started catching more fish. So they liked blue that day up there. Then Ken Westerfeld, on a boat called the Hampton Lady up on Long Island, they had organized it Mondays of whatever year it was in August. Every Monday, so 4 Mondays, they had this tournament pool to enter. When you went on the boat that day, you were automatically entered with your fee to get on. And then the top prize that day, the first through third place or whatever, but the first place would get a Chow custom rod. And Ken Westerfeld won it 3 out of the 4 Mondays on this rig right here. It's a high-low with twin 3-inch spoons. Those are those 8-inch loops. And he did have a sinker down here. And it was not a fast grip, but he was popping it. And whatever it was it worked effectively at attracting him. And it won't, underwater, especially with bait on the hook, it won't cluster around that standing line like it just did there. But that's what he was using, a rig like that. So. And my personal best is the one with the blue tag on it. That's the 11-pounder. It was on the gold spoon. And again, I'd only finished it for like 15 minutes. I was with Captain Gordy on that trip. And he saw me with the spoon. He said, hey, I have a recommendation. And they have fluke ribbons on the boat on the bait station. From the prior day's catch, they cut those ribbons on the fluke. They have dark and they have light, the belly and the back of the fluke. So he said, I want you to put the dark one on the top of the 2 hooks, and I want you to face the skin upward, the dark side facing up. And then on the back spoon, you put the white one, and I want the skin to face down, so it doesn't look like a baby fluke. And I'm like, okay. And 15 minutes later, oh my Jesus, 11-pounder. And I've gone on to catch numbers of fish on that very outfit right there, that very same bait setting. So two pieces of fluke belly, one dark and one light, opposing sides, and it worked greatly. So last year I went on a charter boat out of Rhode Island, and day one was crazy slow drift. We were hardly moving, and in my mind, okay, that means Geoff cast out with a spinning rod, jig it back, work it, make him bite, and I'm getting some, but hardly any. And the guy that's next to me, he came on the trip. It was a friend of a friend, and when we got our gear in the truck to head up from Pennsylvania, Maryland, I said, well, where's your fishing gear? Oh, I don't have any gear for that. The captain will have some, won't he? I'm like, yeah, I suppose. Well, good, because I'll use what he's got. I don't know anything about this flounder fishing. I said, well, they're fluke up there. Well, I don't know anything about it, he said. So I'm like, okay. Well, I'm thinking I'll help this guy because it's obviously he's new to it. So he gets on the boat, the captain hands him this it was a high-low rig, and he's just dragging it. I'm like, well, you kind of want to work. Why? I got one. And so here we were hardly moving, and I'm twitching in every which way, and he's catching him and shooting me because I could see it, but I didn't think through. Geoff, stop jigging it so crazy. And he caught everybody at least 3-1 that day. Day two was different. The very next day, as we motored out, the captain said, well, we got some wind today. And sure enough, the wind with the tide produced drift speeds of 1.5 to 2.2 knot. And I knew in my mind, it's going to be spoon time. And so I loaded up, put the spoons down, and was catching, and I was catching like crazy. And everybody else was using their rigs from the day before. They weren't doing well. And I said, hey, how about the spoon? No, that's okay. And so I think I outcaught everybody combined 4 or 5-1. I outcaught them, and that was that spoon. And there it is. Well, that's it right here. That's the Dare Angel spoon right there. You can see that gal with the holding the fishing rod right there. So these are, again, some different patterns that are available to run through. They have loads more than that even. So
that Dare Angel, how long was that?
that one was 4.5. So there's 4.5, and then there's 5 3/4. But I've done well on both. It's just that day I chose the 4.5. So see if I can get this to go. This will. I don't know why it's not. Darn it! It worked one.
This is a 5-inch M3.
So that's the wobble I want to see when I put it over the side of the boat.
M3 trailer on it. The other ones are over my trailers that I made. This is the M3.
I'm not
trailer.
moving at all. It's just the current causing that.
They change them every year, so I'm not up to date with that. But this is shows a good movement. But again, back to the 5-inch spoon. I think they just catch more wind in their sail when they're that big a spoon. A little surprising for me today. I thought starting out that the 3-inchers would dance more than the bigger ones, but not true. The bigger ones have a bigger sail and catch more of that current when you're moving and induce more action in the spoon. So definitely taught me something today. There you go.
Okay, so this is the 3-inch spoon right here. And initially, oh wow, 3-inch, that's smaller, it'll go better. It'll do all kinds of, no. It's that bigger profile spoon. Even though it weighs a little more, it's just got so much more surface area that given the same speed, it has a lot more wobble. And that wobble, not size, the wobble is what draws those fluke in. So I liken using the 3-inch spoons more to jigging them on that high-low rig than running it behind the boat. Those fluke aren't really hitting the spoon, they're hitting what's behind it. So don't worry that you're outclassing. Besides which, I've caught fluke 12 inches on the 5-inch spoon. So they'll hit anything when they're ready. So the areas where the biggest fluke are that I see is out at Nantucket or Block Island or Long Island. Those would be the areas I would recommend focusing. Some of these are so popular and hard to get on, you almost have to reserve, like the Helen H at Nantucket. They start taking reservations January 3rd or whatever it is, and within a day or two, they're basically full for the year. So it's really a competitive business getting on some of these boats. Some of them, though, offer open boat. So you just kind of have to be plugged into the different boats and keep your ear to the wind and take a shot at that if you can't get a group together for a charter. So I've caught pool winners using the spoons and stuff. There's that pink one on the left that I referenced. Done quite well. That was out of Delaware right there. Well, actually, both of those were Delaware fish. Caught a pile. That's on Gordy's boat, and that was my group. I didn't catch all those, but we certainly slayed them there. And again, time and again, I have
That was
great.
in Maryland?
That one is Delaware on the right.
What size are the fluke keepers?
What size are the what?
What size are the keepers?
Those are here.
Yeah.
Those are like 18 to 20 inch right there. Gordy was like, keep them. You know, we got some 5 to 8 pounds. It wasn't a great day for monsters that day. So now I mentioned that I'm a civil engineer, so I figured things have a logic, a purpose, and whatnot, and I tend to call it extrapolate. I take what I learned here, and maybe it works that way over here. So I got the bug. I love fluke fishing, and I have ever since I was a kid and started. And then I heard about it. If you go to Alaska, you can kind of get these fluke on steroids, is what I figured they were. So, and I did. I started catching them, halibut, and then as I began working my magic with the spoons for fluke here, I said, I wonder if I can catch a fluke, or I'm sorry, a halibut on the spoon. And that tells you right there it happened. That is an M3 6-inch spoon. Now, I'll admit, I had to take the trailer. That trailer hook is no way, shape, or form ready for a halibut. You need bigger baits. So I put a split ring on there and those are 10-0 hooks, a long shank, and I gobbled up one of them. Well, you can see the remnant, but I had more bait on than that. I left the other one bare. Those halibut are pretty vigorous, active. They're going to grab hold of that. In one case, you're allowed, we were going unguided. These are just friends of mine. If you're unguided in Southeast Alaska, you're allowed 2 halibut per person per day. So we'd already caught, for the 4 of us, we'd already caught 2 halibut. And kind of like at a point in the day, what are we going to do? Well, let's try this spot. So what that meant is we had 6 to go. And we got to this spot, and the current's running hard. I'm like, here we are at anchor, but the current's running so hard, they're going to come up and hit this circle hook plane with bait. If I put my spoon down there with the bait on it, it's wobbling, just sitting still. You got a still one, the guy next to me is fishing, and mine's going like this, and this wobbling one of the 6 that we had to catch. And I gave the rod to my son eventually and passed it around. We caught 5 of the 6 on the wobbling spoon and 1 on the plane. So there's that theory that they're just big, aggressive flatfish like fluke, and it proved itself, and I was so happy that that worked out that way. So if I'm making my own rig for spoons, the key with running a spoon is in the M31 rigs themselves, are, even though they have swivels, which I'm not hugely a fan of, but it's okay. The spoon is not intended to spin, it's intended to wobble. So if I can avoid having a swivel in line with it, then so much the better. So what I've done with 80-pound test, I created a rig like this. If you know your knots, this is called a perfection loop here. And the beauty of it, which we tend to put that at the end of a rig if we're creating a rig line, that perfection loop really strong there. And the little tag end kind of sticks out like that, but who cares? We cut it short, it's great. It's not a problem. It's not going to really catch weeds. And I got to thinking, well, I do want it I want the tag end to stick out at 90 degrees, because when it's running this way, that goes down to my sinker. There's my sinker loop, and then I create another perfection loop at this end, and I put my snap on it. You want to snap at the end where your spoon's attached. So, hey, they're not hidden on pink. Let me try Grello. So you don't have to cut anything. You just open the snap and put a new spoon on and you're in business. So that's how they work, and that's how I tied it. So I believe, well, in the proportions, the beauty of tying your own is if you're out there that day and you're seeing, hey, well, the rig I brought has only got a 24-inch thing. I think I need longer. Well, I can't get longer out of a 24 that I have. I'll just tie my own. And so in that case, when I tie this, I make it, well, this one's even longer than 30, but I can start at 30 and even go to 36. When you tie your own, you have the ability to adjust this geometry and find maybe what's best that day. So we're at booth 748. We have all kinds of gear, rods and reels, the green ones, which I've heard some people say, wow, that's so bright. That's what we call our spoon rod, but they have some black ones as well. They have lots of terminal tackle, the spoons, these rigs here. With teasers, there's the teaser low and this 3-inch spoon high, and then these squids here. Well, I've done great on sea bass and fluke on that. You're welcome to come up here and look. I have to probably clear out of here shortly, but again, booth 748, tell them Geoff sent you, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Any questions? Fire away or come on up while I'm